saved a touchdown, most likely.
There goes Garner to the 40, to the 30, breaks a tackle at the 20, 10, 5, unbelievable! Touchdown!
And welcome back to an episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. But now we have a third guest co-host for today's podcast, PJ Clark, who is a good friend of mine from Syracuse. You may also know him as @TheRealPJ Clark from Twitter. Great Jets fan, funny dude. And he's also the host of @Boom or Bust Draft podcast, which he just started a few months ago. It's already doing really well. So I'm sure we're going to talk about the Jets draft because it's pretty much all we've been looking forward to since the beginning of September. But PJ, I'll start with you, and then Michael, I'll go over to you. Let's talk about this Kansas City Chiefs game because another week, another Jets loss. But every week I get emotionally less and less invested. So this week I was actually, despite only putting up 9 points and having no touchdowns, I was fairly impressed with how the Jets did in the first half. PJ, what were your initial takeaways from this Jets game?
Yeah, first off, thank you boys for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Very, very much appreciate it. I was actually impressed with the moving of the ball in the first half, especially. I did not have 3 scores in the first half pegged for this Jets team. But, Sergio Sanity was going well there for a little while. And the blocked field goal at the end of the first half was kind of a bummer. But it was better than I thought it was, going to be, rather. I did not see 9 points going up on the board, and I did not see only 35 going up for Kansas City. So I guess it was fine.
I have to say, I did text you right before, and the game kind of went how I thought it was going to go. I was a little off in some of my predictions, but I was like, I think it might be kind of close to start, and then they're going to blow the doors open either right before or right after half, which is exactly what happened. The Chiefs did cover the 19.5-point spread. But yeah, that blocked field goal was pretty huge. But yeah, the ability to move the ball the last 2 weeks in the first half has been fairly impressive under Dow Loggins, even if it hasn't resulted in any touchdowns. Or I guess it resulted in the Michael Pirine touchdown, but it hasn't resulted in much points. Michael, what did you take away from this game? Obviously, again, some positive things from the Jets rookies, Denzel Mims, Mekhi Becton, the Michael Pirine, and Braden Mann. You can't forget him. Ashton Davis did struggle a little bit. I don't think we saw Zuniga much at all. But Michael, just your initial takeaways from Sunday's game.
Yeah, I mean, for the second straight week, since switching over to Dow Loggins as the play caller, we saw the offense come out and look like an NFL team for a couple of quarters. They had the opportunity to score 12 points if they could have made that last field goal. But, again, they came out looking pretty decent. It wasn't explosive, but, they were picking up productive short gains, getting into third and shorts, converting them at a relatively decent rate, picking up first downs on first and second down, which is something they never do. And they got themselves into scoring position 4 times. I believe all 4 times they had the ball in the first half. It was a slower paced game. They only had 4 drives each in the first half, I believe. So they looked competent in the first half, but second consecutive week come out after halftime and absolutely nothing offensively in the second half. I think they had 63 yards second half in this game, which looks like a lot compared to 4 last week, but is still pretty awful in its own right. So same issues still linger that we've seen with Gase, the lack of adjusting. I guess the starts have been faster, or more sustained throughout the first 2 quarters,
Right.
but still nothing to show for it in the second half.
Yeah, it's funny as Jets fans that we watch these last 2 games and we think like, wow, we look like a competent team. We put up,
I know, it's like, wow, we look so confident. They put up 19 points over the past 2 games. It's incredible.
And we said this last week, and it's pretty much been the case the entire season, is the defense has been arguably more alarming than the offense. I mean, the offense sucks, but it sucked last year. Darnold has definitely regressed. There's been a lot of negatives with the offense, don't get me wrong. Adam Gase is still the number one problem with the team. But I would say the defense's regression, I think, caught me by more surprise than the offense's ineptitude. Because this was a top 10 unit under Greg Williams last year. Obviously, they lost Jamal Adams. You could point to losing CJ Mosley, I guess, but they only had him for 3 quarters last season. PJ, I'll go to you first again. What do you think has been the biggest issue with this defense? Do you think it really is just the loss of Jamal Adams? Do you think it's defenses having, or teams rather having an entire year of Jets Greg Williams tape? Do you think it's Greg Williams' message has run out? Or do you think it's just, Greg Williams doesn't have enough ingredients in the kitchen to make a good dish?
I think it's more of, I think his luck has kind of run out. I think last year you had Nathan Shepard, who was really good. Kyle Phillips made a lot of plays. Foley Fatukasi made a lot of plays, and those guys have not really been back. I don't even think Shepard plays anymore. And those guys have just not had the same seasons. Even Basham, who has been pretty good this year, who I do like a lot, and I would like to stick around. He had a better last year than he has now. Avery got picked apart today. He was getting bullied by Travis Kelce over the middle. And the corners. I mean, Bless is a tackler. He's not great in coverage. Desir is in a long line of bad Jets cornerbacks of Tremaine Johnson and Buster Skrine. Desir might be up there. I don't care how many interceptions he has, but Ashton got picked on today. I don't know how many guys, could really do much against Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, but Ashton definitely was involved in a couple of those deep touchdowns. And, the one positive, I guess Quinnen played well. So that's pretty much where we're at. I'd like to see more Bryce Huff snaps, but overall, I don't think it's an Adams thing. I think it's just kind of the carriage turned into a pumpkin from last year because Greg elevated all of these, middling to terrible edge rushers that have just gone back to sucking.
Right. And there was a lot, and that was kind of Joe Douglas's, I guess, I don't want to say theme, but the way he built this team, he was certainly relying on a lot of guys, like Bless Austin, like Blake Cashman, like Brashad Perriman, a lot of guys who we were expecting to potentially take a jump. And some call it tanking, others just call it, a smart assessment of where this team was. He wasn't going to dump a bunch of resources and try to make this a quick fix into a winner. But I was saying this to Michael yesterday. If you were to tell me that, Mekhi Becton was going to have the type of start to his career that he's had so far, because we were talking about it in the draft that he had the highest ceiling out of all those tackles. And the fact that he's answered some of his warts in pass protection as a college prospect, I mean, you can make a very good case that he will be the best tackle in that class, even above Jedrick Wills, who's been playing well. And if you were to tell me that Quinnen Williams is developing in his second season the way that he's been, I would say that this team, it would certainly be in the ballpark of an 8-8, 9-7 team, and not on, track to be one of the worst in NFL history. Michael, I just asked PJ the question about the defense. What do you think it is with that defensive unit? Just when you think about the development of Quinnen Williams, particularly as PJ just brought up, because he's really looked well. John Franklin Myers has made some nice plays. Even guys like Bryce Huff has made some plays. What is the big issue with this defense? Did just the carriage turn into a pumpkin, or do you think it is just a true lack of talent?
Well, Ben, I think the point that you brought up is really the crux of it. They've been relying on a lot of guys to take second-year leaps, and those haven't really come together. Blake Cashman, you mentioned, he got hurt 3 snaps into the season and hasn't been able to get back into that starting lineup. Bless Austin has had a horrible season. I really thought he had the potential to be a solid starter with, how he's able to just come out last season after 2 ACL surgeries, played solid that second half until he did finish the season getting benched. But he's really struggled this season, has missed a lot of tackles, even though he can make some. When he does finish his tackles, they look really good, especially in the flat, but he misses a lot, and he's been at the top of the list of missed tackles at cornerback. So he's disappointed. You haven't seen Cashman break out, so you've been stuck with Neville Hewitt, who is not good, and Avery Williamson has not been close to the same player following his return from ACL surgery. And then on the defensive line, Foley Fatukasi hasn't been as much of a presence against the run as he was last year. Nathan Shepard, who had a promising finish to last season as a pass rusher, he's been non-existent. He spent a lot of time on the bench too, and when he has been out there, he hasn't looked good at all. So I think that's really the main point. And losing Jamal is huge. I think that it definitely is really the main reason for the decline. I think his role in their success last year definitely hasn't gotten as much credit. Not that he didn't get the credit, because we knew how great he was, but I definitely think that this is a look at what last year's unit could have looked like without Jamal Adams in there, because he's just such a big part of what Greg was doing. Second half, he really changed up the scheme, was playing a lot of Tampa 2, was being really aggressive, moving him and Brian Poole around, and was making things easier on the outside corners, just playing them off, relying on them to just do their role, make tackles underneath. But now without Jamal Adams, you're relying on a lot of guys to kind of pick up that slack in a lot of different ways. And players like Austin, like Desir, haven't been able to do it. And Marcus May, when he was in Jamal Adams' role, was not nearly the same player as Jamal was at that position. Now that May is back at free safety, he looks more comfortable. He's playing a lot better, but in Jamal's role, he wasn't playing well. And then McDougald, no matter where he's been, has really struggled. So there are a lot of different reasons, but Jamal is a big part of it. And I think, like you said, Ben, just relying on players to take leaps, be able to handle bigger roles, it for the most part hasn't worked out.
And we didn't even, neither of us mentioned him. I was just thinking about guys who I tried to see make plays today. Jordan Jenkins, who has been the one kind of mainstay over the last couple of years in terms of any at all pass rush, has been nowhere this year. So even when you're taking a guy maybe not expected to make a leap, but I know I was surprised at least at the 1 year, $5 million deal that he got. I expected him to leave, and I expected him to get a little more after 8 sacks last year. He's got 1 this year, and I can't even remember the one. I don't remember the last time he made a play.
Yeah, I mean, he's never been that high output sack guy. He's more of a cleanup run stuffer guy, but you have to give Joe Douglas some credit there. I mean, I think Joe Douglas, so far, his biggest mistake is not bringing back Robbie Anderson, but his ability to evaluate talent, and Jordan Jenkins is a good example of that, of not overpaying, because you see a guy get 8 sacks. He's been here since 2016, and not handing out immediately a 3-year, $20 million contract or something. 1 year, $5 million is what he thought Jordan Jenkins was worth. And that's what he's played like, arguably under that. So you have to give Douglas some credit for that. And this is the part of the podcast that I think could get a little contentious between PJ and Michael, because Michael, you were I don't want to say number one, but you did write 100 reasons to believe in Sam Darnold over the offseason. We want to talk about carriages turning into pumpkins. Your view of Sam Darnold has drastically fallen. PJ, I know you are slowly getting on board with the Trevor Lawrence talk, but I know that Sam Darnold is your young king. I saw this question posed by @RajPC1 on Twitter, and it pretty much ignited a little bit of a firestorm of debate. And so I wanted to bring to this podcast. PJ, I'll start with you. Would you classify Sam Darnold as a bust? Obviously, considering the surrounding situation. And look, he still has 8 games to prove himself as the leader of this franchise. But certainly at the beginning of the season, nobody would have said he was. But after 8 games, those are 8 games under Adam Gase and with one of the worst situations in the NFL. But those 8 games have been among the worst, not only in the NFL this season, but in NFL history. So PJ, I'll start with you. And then Michael, you can pick up and absolutely obliterate Sam Darnold.
I actually voted in this very poll from Raj. I said no, but the more I think it was a very quick trigger for me on no. But the more I think about it, I think because the comparison is now Tannehill, right? It's like, look what he's doing without Adam Gase coaching,
and with King Arthur. Can we just acknowledge?
Yeah, and with King Arthur, your boy. Very true. So the comparison is Tannehill. I don't remember Tannehill being ever like this bad.
Right.
Yeah. I think it is getting harder and harder to defend Sam and even say that he's not ruined forever and say that he's going to be fine in Indianapolis or Pittsburgh or San Francisco, whoever. I still think somebody smart, preferably Kyle Shanahan, should try to make a play and try to redeem him. But especially with 8 more games of this, I think it's borderline irredeemable. And it breaks my heart to say, but I don't see it being fixed. My biggest thing is now you have a franchise left tackle in Becton, and you're still getting, even in a clean pocket, it's still Happy Feet back there. And that has gotten worse now over the course of 3 years. And I don't care who the coach is. At some point, it's on the quarterback. And at some point, he's making these mental mistakes. He had 2 passes today that should have just been blatant interceptions. I tweet out every week, there's the Sam Darnold bonehead play of the week. And those aren't going away. And like, if you're really, really good, you can get away with those 1 a week. He's not that good. And I'm beginning to believe I don't think he'll ever be.
Yeah, and I think the point you made, PJ, about Tannehill is an important one to keep in mind when you're making this comparison, because Tannehill, even though Darnold he's a more talented prospect coming out, you might even consider him more physically talented right now. But Tannehill was never this bad from a production standpoint. First 2 years for Darnold, there was every reason to be optimistic. The final 4 games of his rookie season, fantastic. Last year started off rough. He was playing with mono in the opening game, missed 3 games, then was recovering from it, but had a good second half of the season, solid second half. Not amazing, but something you could build off of. But this year, his production is just historically bad coming into this game, and it's probably worse now. His first down rate, percentage of passes for first down or touchdown, was on pace to be the worst versus league average in the history of the stat, which is since 1993. So almost 30 years, no qualified quarterback has been as bad versus league average, converting first downs and touchdowns as he has been. And there have been a lot of games in his career where his production has not matched up the way he's actually played. Like the Bengals game last year, he put up terrible stats, but he actually played pretty good because the supporting cast let him down. And the supporting cast still has been good this year, but he in his own right, independent of what's going on around him, has been a much worse quarterback than he was the last 2 years. So his production, just Tannehill's, he was not good for Miami. He probably was, you probably wouldn't even consider him above average, but he was not this bad. So, and Tannehill too, when he went to Tennessee, was already in his 30s. So it is a lot different. You're talking about a guy who was later in his career, a lot more developed and kind of easier to tweak. And then now you're talking about Darnold, a more broken prospect. So those comparisons, while Gase is the common variable there isn't, there are a lot of things that are different, namely just the production that you're working off of, because Darnold right now is just, I mean, every single game this season, he's thrown for under 7 yards per attempt. This is now 5 straight games he's been under 6 yards per attempt, and that's just not going to cut it. So in terms of whether or not he's a bust, I think it depends on how extreme you think a bust is. Like, is a bust Christian Hackenberg, or is someone like Mitch Trubisky a bust? Because I think it just depends how you define the term, because you could have Hackenberg, Stephen Hill, Devin Smith, guys who do absolutely nothing, Ja'Kai Polite, or is it someone who just underperforms at all compared to their draft position? Because if that's what your definition is, then I mean, Darnold definitely could be considered a bust, because I think if I told you that when the Jets traded up for him, that he'd give them 3 seasons, they wouldn't make the playoffs, they wouldn't win more than 7 games in a season, he'd never throw more than 17 touchdowns in a season, he'd be the worst quarterback in the league in his 3rd season, I think people would be pretty disappointed in that. But at the same time, his decline largely has to do with how the team's built around him, the coach they hired to develop him. So it's largely not his fault that he's here, but at the same time, the results are definitely well below what I think the Jets were hoping they would be getting when they traded up to take him at number 3.
And that's before I didn't mean to cut you off, Wes, but
no worries.
At some point, you have to, the supporting cast is bad. Everybody knows that. We can talk about that for an hour. It's not going to make a difference that, Joe Douglas for some reason thought Rashad Perriman might turn into Randy Moss. But at some point, if you are this franchise changing guy, this top 10, 12, whatever we want to call him, whatever we thought he might be, quarterback, you make do with what you have. And right. I hate to make the Trevor Lawrence analogy, but we talked about it when Justin Ross got hurt and Clemson lost T. Higgins and then now losing Justin Ross. Trevor Lawrence is throwing to, they're 4-star prospects in Frank Ladson and Joseph Ngata, and Amari Rodgers is a really good slot receiver, but he does not have 2 of the 4 best wide receivers in the country that he had last year, and he's making do. And I get it's a different situation, but at some point, if you are that good, you just elevate the talent around you, and Sam has never been able to do that.
Yeah, he's certainly not the Mitch Trubisky or Christian Hackenberg type of bust that Michael, you alluded to. He's probably more in the vein of, and I'm not necessarily calling these guys busts, I just think this is where Sam aligns with the Jared Goff and the Carson Wentzes of the world. I think if Darnold was in a situation that was more comparable to those guys' situation, you'd see him have much more success. I don't think he's as bad as his numbers show. He's never been that bad. But PJ, like you said,
this year he has, though. I think that's the most important thing. Last 2 years, he definitely was not as bad as those numbers, but this year he has been. I think that's really is there's season so hard to bank on him over a Lawrence, even a Fields or Lance because the production is awful and you can't really, even though the supporting cast excuse is there, when you just look at his film, independent of all that other stuff, he's playing that badly, just accuracy, footwork, decision making. So I mean,
no doubt that's the case. But when you factor in who his coach is, and you can argue fairly easily that Adam Gase is the worst coach in the NFL and among maybe the worst head coaches in NFL history when you think about it. And when you look at his supporting cast, and I'm not trying to make excuses for him because he clearly has shown way more warts this season than his first 2 seasons. But PJ alluded to it. He has the Sam Darnold bonehead play of the week. He will have the Sam Darnold, amazing play of the week. This week was probably the throw to Mims, I guess, that, the NFL Twitter account will post and people will think, will say, hey, Sam Darnold's going to be really good somewhere else. But you can't win with J.R. Smith at the quarterback position. You can't win with a guy who has a few great plays, a few terrible plays, and then just, kind of mediocre. You can't have a streaky guy at quarterback and expect to win Super Bowls. And that's why I think it's very clear that if the Jets are in the position to do so, they're going to take a quarterback pretty much no matter how Darnold finishes his last 8 games as a member of the New York Jets. And speaking of those quarterbacks, obviously Trevor Lawrence has COVID, so he's not playing this past weekend or this next weekend at the very least. But Justin Fields played on Saturday. He looked really good. PJ, as a draft guy, part of the reason we brought you on is we wanted to get your thoughts on some of these draft guys. Let's start with the quarterbacks. Another guy we didn't mention, Trey Lance. I would say those 3 are really the only 3 in contention as of now, and probably more so Lawrence and Fields as the guys that the Jets could look at in April as Darnold's potential replacement. Again, 8 games left, but it's just been so bad through 8 games, and this team is so bad that they're pretty much guaranteed to at least be picking top 5, and it's almost a foregone conclusion that Darnold isn't going to I don't even want to say return to the heights of his second season. It's just this first 8 games have been so bad that the next 8 don't get much easier when you look at the schedule. And I don't have much confidence that he will turn it around. So let's talk about Fields first and then Lawrence, because obviously Lawrence is the more obvious of the 2 as a replacement. But what are your thoughts on this quarterback group? Start with Fields. You could talk about Lawrence. You could talk about Lance. I know you've been against the idea of drafting it, but it seems, as you just kind of alluded to, you're more and more welcoming a new quarterback in 2021. What are your thoughts on this class? Who do you think fits the Jets best? Who excites you the most? And just kind of your overall take.
Well, overall, as a class, you didn't even mention it. A guy who's been a really big riser for me, Zach Wilson, BYU's quarterback, I think has now played himself. I have him at 7 right now on my board. I feel like that's kind of high, but I try to take positional value to account. So I do think Zach Wilson has now played himself assuredly into the first round, if not into the top half of it. But as you said, I think the only 2 guys that I would target if I'm the Jets, and they should be, in theory, at least in a bad enough position to go get, are Lawrence and Fields. Entering the season, I had Trey Lance at QB2. Just based off of last year's tape, I think much like you're seeing kind of Justin Herbert, I was low on him. And now the reason why, when I go back and watch, because I've watched a lot of Oregon tape from last year for Penei Sewell, but Oregon's offense really limited him. They didn't play to his strengths. Oregon runs this offense that kind of just did a lot of screens, a lot of quick passes that didn't let Herbert kind of build. And now you're seeing it. Yeah, he has a great supporting cast with the Chargers in Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Eckler when he's healthy. Josh Kelly was a really good draft pick by them this year, but they're letting him cook. It's the let Russ cook thing. Justin Herbert is cooking. That's never something he was allowed to do at Oregon. Justin Fields this year, the knock on him is that Ohio State's offense is so incredibly easy to run. They have really easy reads. He's playing with 5 stars all around him. Guys get open, and it's like kind of a one read thing. And he makes all of the throws. This year, though, I know it's only been 2 games. He's now firmly QB2 for me over Lance. I thought I compare Trey Lance to baby Cam Newton because he's a little bit smaller. I do think Trey Lance is a dynamic runner. That's his biggest strength. When you're drafting quarterback, maybe he's not ideal, but he is an absolute tank. He will run through you, around you, juke past. He is fast. He is huge, 6'4", 225. But the physical tools have not caught up to the mental game yet. He doesn't always have to make reads at North Dakota State that are NFL reads. He's got NFL arm strength, but the accuracy isn't there. In his one game this year, he threw his first interception. That was his big calling card last year, 28 touchdowns, no interceptions. He did not look good accuracy-wise in their showcase game this year. I think that's partially because North Dakota State showed up off the street cold and played a Central Arkansas team that was playing their fourth game of the year. They were 2-1, and Central Arkansas, I believe, was number 11 in FCS at the time of that game. So Central Arkansas was kind of at game tempo, and it's hard to simulate that. But Justin Fields has been so impressive. He came back leaner. He's on this vegan diet now. He looks faster. He's better cut. I saw Sam, your boy Sam, the other day was tweeting about how great he is at the read option, which I think is really, really important. He is very quick to process even that in that, rather easy Ohio State offense. And a couple of the throws he made last night, the touchdown to Olave was a great throw. He made the throw to Garrett Wilson in the Nebraska game over the middle. He has really, really impressed me through 2 games. But if you're talking about the guy who I want for the Jets the most, I think everybody wants for the Jets the most, it has to be Trevor Lawrence. I actually got the chance to go see him last weekend against Syracuse. Made the trip down to Clemson, South Carolina. And listen, it was one of his worst games in college. He was not good. He didn't throw for 300 yards. He threw his first career pick 6. Accuracy was a problem. His best ball all day was actually dropped. He threw a 60-yard dime to Amari Rodgers, who just dropped it on the goal line. But the way that he processed things against a Syracuse defense that runs a 3-3-5, kind of different, and has a pretty good secondary. Their 2 outside corners are among 2 of the better graded by PFF in the country. They haven't allowed that many touchdowns passing this year on the outside. It's really been tight ends over the middle that's killed Syracuse. But Trevor was so quick to process that Syracuse played kind of this catch technique where they just played off the wide receivers, and Trevor was just hitting, 8 yards every time, button hooks, curls over the middle, just letting the game come to him. He didn't try to do too much. He took what Syracuse gave him, and that's what I was really impressed by. So, listen, I don't think you can go wrong. Lawrence, Fields, I love them both. To me, I think Lawrence is in a different class. I had been for the past couple of weeks saying if you're going to move on from Sam, it should only be for Trevor. I do think it's bad enough at this point with Sam that Justin Fields hasn't inserted himself into the conversation. Trey Lance, I think, is a bigger project. He's not there as a passer immediately. I think maybe a team like Atlanta, where if you're going to have Matt Ryan and you can kind of redshirt, scare quotes, Trey Lance and get him up to speed in the NFL, that'll benefit him more than playing immediately. And Zach Wilson, the meteoric rise is going to continue, especially if BYU keeps winning these games on national TV. More eyes are going to be on him. And he really is this Patrick Mahomes type gunslinger. I wouldn't take him if I were the Jets. I don't think the Jets are going to be in a, bad enough draft-wise position to take him. Picking outside of the top 5, I'd be surprised if he got in there. But if Zach Wilson was QB3, wouldn't be shocked at this point over Trey Lance after only playing 1 game. But I think it's Lawrence, sizable gap, Fields, and then I think you have to strongly consider moving on after that.
Yeah, certainly not a bad year to need a quarterback for the Jets.
Listen, if this was the year to go 0-16, you are going to be drafting the best quarterback prospect, at least since Andrew Luck, if not, going back to Peyton. Like, you could do way worse than going 0-16 this year.
Exactly. When you figure going 0-16 in front of no fans, you have the built-in COVID excuse. And then, arguably, I would say probably the best quarterback prospect to ever come out. That doesn't mean he's going to be a better quarterback than Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck. But I've heard of this kid since high school. He's just so refined and so polished in so many different ways that young quarterbacks really don't get to until they're in their 3rd or 4th season in the NFL. He's way more polished in things that Sam Darnold is still at level 1 at. When you talk about going through reads, that processing time, not getting happy feet, taking what the defense gives them. Lawrence is clearly exciting. I think if the Jets compare Trevor Lawrence with Arthur Smith, including Joe Douglas in that trio as well. I said this to Michael. I would guarantee you that the Jets, if they have those three, would win a Super Bowl in the next 10 years, which is a bold take for a franchise that doesn't want it in 50 plus.
No, but that's just the thing. It's like, if you have Trevor Lawrence, if you have that number one pick, people are good. Like, real coaches are going to want to coach him. Real players are going to want to go play with him. Like, everybody knows how good he is. That is like a franchise changing idea.
Yeah, and look at the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins are a great example of a team that was under the same head coach, Adam Gase. They were looked at as a laughingstock. Going into last season, they were looked at as the team that was also going to go 0-16, but they brought in a good head coach in Brian Flores, who's established a different culture. They got their quarterback. It'd be a little bit different between Tua and Trevor Lawrence. But now Miami is seen as probably an attractive free agent destination this season. So it's right now that there's the whole talk about Trevor should avoid the Jets, and that the Jets are, an inept organization, which they are, and that they're a laughingstock, which they are. But if you bring in Trevor Lawrence, you're going to be able to bring in a good GM or a good head coach. And I believe that you already have a competent GM in Joe Douglas who knows how to build a franchise. If you can't land Trevor, if Sam Darnold sneaks in a few wins and you're picking 2 or 3, I think Justin Fields is a terrific consolation prize. And if, because you don't have Trevor, you can't attract Arthur Smith, I think pairing him with Greg Roman, now I've been saying this for 2 weeks now, who has the connection to Joe Douglas, would be insanely fun, given the offense that he built around Lamar Jackson. I think he's the perfect fit for a Justin Fields type quarterback. I didn't even consider Wilson, but it is, in my defense, it's just November. It's November 1st today. So we still have a lot of time to evaluate these quarterbacks. I've really just been looking at 1 and 2, but certainly a guy like Wilson and even Lance is something to consider, just in case the Jets pick up, a win against Miami or Las Vegas or the Chargers, just something random. And work their way out of Lawrence and maybe even Fields territory, which I don't think will happen. I think they're about an 80% chance they pick number 1. I
don't see Trey or Zach Wilson getting into even the conversation, but I agree. I think the only way Trey Lance works with the Jets is if you give him Greg Roman and somebody that's going to be able to tailor the offense around just the absurd arm strength and the rushing ability. But if you try to put him in an immediate, pro style offense, I don't know if it's going to work. The Jets don't really have a great success rate on taking these project. I don't want to call him a project, but he is a project as a passer. He's not a project as a football player. I don't know if I like the Jets odds by taking not a slam dunk when you would have Fields or Lawrence to take it as well. So I'm higher on Trey Lance the most. I don't want him out on the Jets. I think they ruin him in a second. But listen, you said Fields is a consolation. Fields isn't a consolation. He's just not. He is in, almost any other draft. He is the by far QB1. After last year, I still had questions about Burrow last year. I thought him being kind of old was a thing for me. He was a 50-year senior. I had some questions about, the great offense he was in, having NFL players around him. He's been just as good as, I thought he would, but maybe Fields is QB1 last year. Fields, in the Sam draft as a prospect, Sam, great prospect, not that great of an NFL player, as we just said. Fields and Sam, I think is close to be QB1 in that draft. It's just, he feels like a consolation because he's coming behind the greatest college prospect ever.
Right.
But if you got him, you are already way ahead of the game from where you currently are with Sam Darnold.
Right. And Nanny, I'm going to go to you here because it sounds like pretty much a foregone conclusion that the Jets are going to take a QB with their first pick. I'd be shocked if they don't, if any sort of, if anything transpires over the next 8 weeks that would prevent them from doing so. I think it's pretty much a shoo-in that Joe Douglas is going to go ahead and pick his guy. But luckily, we talked about trading Jamal Adams. Joe Douglas did get himself a haul for him. He has 2 first-round picks the next 2 years. Let's talk about that Seahawks pick this year. We don't necessarily know where it's going to be, but I would say it's pretty safe to assume that it's going to be in the 25 to 32 range. Seattle is a great team this year. I think they'll probably end up making it to that divisional or that championship round, potentially even winning the Super Bowl, but I think they'll fall somewhere in that 25 to 32 range. Before we talk about prospects, Michael, because we haven't done as much work on this as PJ, let's talk about positional need. And this is not something you necessarily want to do in the draft, but when you look at this Jets roster, Michael, what excites you as targets for not only that Seahawks pick, but the Jets' first pick in the second round, which will probably be within a 10 pick margin. So the Jets should have 2 picks and 10 picks right at the end of that first, beginning of the second. What are some of the positions that you would like the Jets to target from a positional value perspective? And when you look at this team as a whole, what exactly Joe Douglas should really focus his sights on in 2021?
Yeah, when you look at this roster, I mean, there's hardly a position that you can't upgrade. So really anything could be on the table depending on how the board falls at that point. But I look back to what the Jets did the last time they drafted franchise quarterback with Sam Darnold and how they messed that up. It was just not supporting him enough. The next pick they made after him was Nathan Shepard. They didn't pick another offensive player for him till Chris Herndon in the 4th round that year. And of course, they traded a lot of the picks to get him in the first place, but still free agency and the draft, not nearly enough to support him. The same thing the following year. So they really did not do enough to support him, both offensive line and the skill position. So I think you definitely ideally would be going with either a guard or a receiver in that spot, because they're probably going to have to do both guard spots. Greg Van Roten and Alex Lewis have not been good. And, they're both up there anyway in age. Van Roten in his 30s, Lewis in his late 20s. So they're not long-term solutions. And they haven't done enough to show you they could be 2-year stopgaps. So I think those 2 spots will definitely be huge points of emphasis. Those 2 spots right there are the main reasons this offensive line, even with Becton and Fant having, some good games. He's had his rough games, but I think he's been okay overall. Even with that, it's been the guard spots that's really held them back, and Connor McGovern too, who has had a disappointing season at center. But you could even move him over to guard if you want to pick up a center, maybe if there's a prospect in free agency or the draft, and kick Connor McGovern back over to guard where he started his career. That's a possibility. But interior offensive line or wide receiver, I think ideally is the spot. But at the same time, if there's a corner, if there's an edge, you can go with that spot, then that can definitely be on the table too, because they've been really weak at those spots for a while. And we've seen how much this defense has been held back by the corner and edge spots. So those 2 positions could definitely be on the table. But ideally, I think the Jets should really emphasize supporting whoever that young quarterback is, getting him as much help as possible, and especially not just help in general, but guys he can grow up with in the league who can complement his skill set and develop year over year, build that chemistry from the start, because Darnold just did not get that opportunity with pretty much anybody on this team. So learning from those mistakes, building around that young quarterback, complimenting him, I think is really important. So I would like to see it be either interior O-line or a wide receiver.
And PJ, if we're going to put some names to those positions, who are some guys that you like at that end of the first, beginning of second, that the Jets, it's still super early, so we don't necessarily know the biggest risers and fallers. But as we've said, we've been thinking about the draft since week 2, and most Jets fans are already sick of this season. So maybe give them some joy on Saturdays. Who are some guys that they should keep an eye out on Saturdays that could maybe help build around Trevor Lawrence or just improve this team as a whole?
I will go to my first thought upon immediately hearing that we would have Seattle's first round pick. Back then, I still imagined that Jamar Chase would be in the cards, that we'd be picking, on the top 6, and Jamar Chase would still be in the cards for Sam Darnold. That has obviously fallen through. But my dream of Trey Smith, the left guard for the Tennessee Volunteers, would be my number 1 target there if you're going with the interior offensive line. I mean, he is a people mover. He is ginormous, and he does it against this SEC competition. It just means more. But as much as we like to make fun of it, I would rather take the SEC proven offensive lineman than a guy like Creed Humphrey, who is a little bit further down my board, who is at Oklahoma. You're playing against pro competition in the SEC. And Trey Smith has been one of the best guards in the country. He did not come out last year, which, surprised me. He's a senior now. I was really happy to get more tape on him this year. He has been outstanding so far. I have him at 21 right now on my board. So if he falls a little bit, I'm higher on him than most. I'm higher on him at least than the rest of my co-hosts on Boomer Bust. But Trey Smith has been my number one guy for that Seattle pick for a long time. So if you ever catch a Tennessee and watch number 73 on the left side, him and Becton would definitely keep Trevor and Justin upright for the next 10 years. But after that, Wyatt Davis, another guard for Ohio State. Those are the two interior offensive linemen that I have first round grades on right now. Wyatt Davis kind of got beat up a little bit by a good Penn State defensive line last night. Allowed a couple of pressures, but again, a really talented guy. I don't think you can go wrong with either Smith or Wyatt Davis. In terms of wide receivers, good year again. As much as the last year's was so great. Another great wide receiver class. I have 5 in the first round now. I think the best chance of falling to that late 20s kind of range there would be Rashad Bateman, who is Minnesota's number 1 wide receiver, who I was lower on to start the year, but after their first 2 games, I've been really impressed with his yak ability and getting into space after making these catches. He's always been a big, spectacular catch guy, but his ability to work and get extra yards after the catch, I've been really, really impressed with. So he's number 0 now. He's all swagged out in the number 0 jersey for Minnesota. And then my biggest riser, if you want to talk about early second round, I'm really higher on him than most, but I think he's kind of, he's not really wide receiver. He's more of an offensive weapon. Kadarius Toney, Florida's running back, wide receiver, a hybrid, pretty much Percy Harvin light. Percy Harvin didn't really work for the Jets, but Kadarius Toney is a playmaker. You get the ball in his hands. They've been running them in the backfield. They've been running them on wide receiver end arounds. They've been throwing to him. He had 3 touchdowns last night against Missouri. Another spectacular game for him. 83 total yards in a blowout win for Florida. I really like Kadarius Toney. And Tylan Wallace, Oklahoma State wide receiver, I think is now playing himself into the early second round. He tore his ACL last year. He's just working back from it, but another outstanding game for him yesterday. He has got bunnies. He can jump out of the building. That is his biggest strength, going up, getting the ball at the catch point. Really good game. Another touchdown yesterday against Texas. Health concerns with him there, especially tearing an ACL already. But, a lot of good wide receivers. I tweeted it out last night in the middle of the Devonta Smith, Alabama's wide receiver. I think will be way gone before the Seattle pick. But Devonta Smith, big night last night. Tylan Wallace, big day yesterday. Kadarius Toney, big night last night. I tweeted it out. There are a lot of good wide receivers in the 2021 NFL draft. And there were a lot of good wide receivers last year. And it was a mistake to only get one, even though the one we got is very, very good. It was a mistake to only get one, and I do expect that to be kind of remedied. So if you're going to take 2, there are plenty to pick from.
Yeah, certainly it's exciting, personally, just as a Jets fan, to hear some of these guys that Joe Douglas can add to this team, because there's just a dearth of talent on this team. When you watch Kansas City and then you watch the Jets, it's just night and day, the type of speed that Kansas City has.
McCole Hardman would be like the best player on the Jets offense. And it's like, that guy is your 4th wide receiver and is only getting these targets because Sammy Watkins is out. It's like, what are we doing here? But I do think, Mims brings that physicality. He's a big dude. You saw it today on that one catch that I sent a tweet out. The guys that I can recall making the catch he made today in our lifetimes, it's like Braylon, big body guy. Brandon Marshall makes that catch. He is that physical freak. So if you want to throw in,
hey, Percy Harvin did make a very similar catch in Kansas City in 2014.
Percy Harvin actually did. That is a very
he made like the same exact catch on the same sideline in Kansas City in 2014.
That is a very good pull by you. But if you said you want speed, you got Toney, you got Rashad Bateman is a bigger guy. If Devonta Smith for any reason falls, Jalen Waddle is a top 10 pick to me. He just broke his ankle. Alabama's other wide receiver. He's my wide receiver too. But if he falls because of that injury, you never know. But there is plenty of wide receiver talent to kind of get a speed guy to go in with Mims and presumably, I guess Jamison Crowder might be sticking around. I don't think he gets traded before Tuesday, but there's plenty of. Yeah, I wouldn't.
For all the people that think Braxton Berrios
I have had enough of Braxton Berrios. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty to go around. There's physical guys. I would love to see Bateman paired with Crowder and Mims. I think that would be fantastic. But I do have a little bit of a man crush on Trey Smith. So if you want to target the interior offensive line, get that out of the way with the Seattle pick, and then 6, 8, 10 picks later, go after a Tony, a Tyler Wallace, a Chris Olave type guy for the wide receiver. I think there is plenty of depth that you can punt that towards the second round.
I mean, that sounds night and day better than what the Jets have right now. Pairing Smith next to Becton on that left side, it would just be the nastiest duo that the Jets may have had.
They would get mean. They would get really mean, and I'd love it.
And it wouldn't even matter who you have at running back. Just run to the left. And speaking of running back,
I'm glad you brought that up. I just want to. There has been a lot of conjecture about drafting Travis Etienne. Drafting Travis Etienne is like the modern NFL running back. His comp is literally Alvin Kamara. That is who he is. You get him the ball in space. He is unbelievable as a receiver. He is a big dude. It's not like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who has been better as a runner than I expected him to be this year, probably playing behind a pretty decent Kansas City offensive line. But his calling card was the receiving. Travis Etienne is going to be a first-round pick. He's good at both. He's the ACC's all-time leading rusher. He is a superstar. He's one of the best running backs in the history of college football. If the Jets spend a first-round pick on Travis Etienne, I might have a stroke on draft night. There are too many holes on this roster. I get the Trevor Travis thing. You could brand it. It would be cool for like 5 minutes. And then I would get really mad thinking of the other guys that we passed up to take a running back in the first round.
Well, I think that Perine is getting a lot of praise, which is unearned in my mind. I think Perine is good, and you're getting solid production from a 4th-round pick. I think he is.
Oh, that might be a stretch.
He's going to be the Jets. Yeah. He's going to be the Jets' next Bilal Powell. Let's not get this wrong. He's going to be a solid contributor. He's going to be on the roster for a while.
If Michael Perine plays 10 years as a 4th-round pick, more power to him. Go for it. He will probably get a second contract from the Jets. We'll see how well he plays. But I don't think he's running back number 1 for the Jets in 2021. No. I think he has good vision. I think he's great as a pass protector. I think he's great as a receiver. I think he's probably the Jets' 3rd down back because he's great in those 3rd and 2 situations because he's good at finding the hole and getting the first down. He can block whoever the quarterback is, and he can catch. But I don't think he's that every down bell cow. He's not Alvin Kamara. He's not Derrick Henry. He's not Dalvin Cook. So I do think the Jets should take a running back, but I agree with you. Do not take a running back in the 1st round. Don't take him in the 2nd round, I don't think either. I think the 3rd round, maybe even go to the 4th round is where you're going to target him. I think one of those 3rd-round picks, we know Douglas likes to trade down, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does move down at some point and picks up an extra 3rd or something. And we have to remember the Darnold trade. They'll probably get either a 2nd or a 3rd there. So I think that is probably where they can get a guy like Journey Brown, like Chuba Hubbard, maybe Najee Harris falls there, Master Teague. There's a lot of good running backs in this class as well. This is actually this is a very talented class for a lot of the positions the Jets need. Who are the run? I know you don't want Etienne unless he falls, has a drastic fall. But who would be some of the running backs that you would like in that 3rd round area? Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about Etienne, I'd be hard pressed not to consider it at 33 if he got there. He is absurd. He is absolutely not getting there pending some drastic injury. But if he was for whatever reason, and you did take an interior offensive lineman with the Seattle pick, I'd be hard pressed. I'd think about it for a while, but I don't know if I'd still do it at that point. You brought up Journey Brown, who has been out for these first 2 games for Penn State, but that is a guy who I'm very high on. I'd like to see him. Depending on what this medical issue is, I don't know if that affects his draft stock at all. Not much has come out about it. But if he declares and if he is in the draft, I definitely think that is somebody that I could see the Jets targeting. You brought up Chuba Hubbard, who is a statistical, maniac for Oklahoma State. But 2 other guys I want to throw out there. You said Najee. I think Najee's pro comp to me is like a less athletic Le'Veon Bell. When I watch Najee Harris, the thing that stands out to me is how patient he is. He looks like Le'Veon in Pittsburgh when he had a couple seconds to evaluate where the holes were going to be and hitting them in stride. And he is a big dude. And that's another guy who he is going to run a slow 40. I'm telling you, it's not going to be a good number. He plays slow, but it's not like he's an Alabama bruiser like Mark Ingram or Derrick Henry. He is absurd. They throw one a week, Najee Harris wheel route, and he just attacks the ball at the catch point. He is very good as a receiver, unlike Derrick Henry, unlike Mark Ingram. He is a totally different Alabama prospect. I still think he goes a little too high, a little too rich for my blood. The guy that you didn't bring up, I like the three names that you mentioned. I'm going to throw a fourth in there. Javonte Williams for North Carolina is currently my running back 3. Another really athletic, fast guy who's active in the passing game. I think between Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, North Carolina has two of the best, might have the best running back tandem in the country. Either one of those guys, I think you're getting them at a better value than you would get a Najee Harris, even a Chuba Hubbard, probably a Journey Brown, unless this medical issue becomes a really big problem. Either of the North Carolina running backs, I think would be really, really good fits on the 2021 Jets.
It's certainly just refreshing to hear this injection that the Jets are going to get into their roster after watching that putrid performance in that second half. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Joe Douglas can do over these next 2 seasons, because I firmly believe in Joe Douglas as a GM. I think, he probably shouldn't have taken Morgan. He probably should have brought him back Robbie Anderson, but he's shown more than enough between the John Franklin Myers edition at the beginning of last year, the Denzel Mims pick, the Mekhi Becton pick, Bryce Huff as an undrafted free agent, the way he has managed the cap, the way he managed the Jamal Adams situation. I believe in Joe Douglas. PJ, before we let you go, Michael and I, everybody knows our number 1 pick for the Jets head coach in 2021. That's Arthur Smith. Who's your guy in your dream world? Let's say you're Woody Johnson. Who are you pairing with Joe Douglas to lead the Jets into the 2020s?
I'm going to say I was very much swayed by your article. Once I read up on Arthur Smith, I that was a name that was in my head. A name that was in my head before we hired Gase was another Tennessee offensive coordinator. My guy before that season was Matt LaFleur, who, I don't know how much of it is Aaron, how much of it is him. Those two don't really like each other, but listen, he'd be better than Adam Gase was. I think Arthur Smith would be a great hire. The guy I keep going back to, though, is a guy that denied the Jets after the 2018 season. And, they went to look for Rule, and the Jets are not a forward-thinking organization. And the fact that they even interviewed Rule was surprising to me. I would go back to Matt Campbell, Iowa State's head coach. I would go back and I would ask again, and I'd really think about it because, Brock Purdy, their quarterback, is perhaps the biggest faller in this NFL draft. He has been downright brutal this year, but they are still a good football team. Matt Campbell, I do believe, is a really good football coach. I would go back to Matt Campbell and at least inquire. And if he doesn't want to leave, that's fine. But if Purdy leaves and, Matt Campbell was coming off back-to-back Big 12 Coach of the Years when the Jets wanted to interview him. So it was understandable that he thought he was building something at Iowa State. But if Purdy leaves, kind of a down year for him this year, they're not going to compete for the Big 12 title. They're still ranked, but it's been disappointing based off of where they were to start the year. And Purdy's regression is a little bit of a concern for me. But if he's willing to leave, I think you take a good, hard look. It's not something I expect the Jets to do because that is not a Jets hiring a college coach. But I would look at Matt Campbell, and I do think somebody gives Joe Brady a chance. I don't think it's us, but I think those would be my two that I would look at.
Yeah, I think Joe Brady, we know he's close with Matt Rule. Matt Rule might tell him to stay away from the Johnsons. But going back to your point and the point that many people have made, if the Jets have Trevor Lawrence, guys like Matt Campbell, guys like Joe Brady, guys like Arthur Smith, they're going to be hard-pressed to turn that job down. I mean, if it's Sam Darnold in year 4 after the regression that he's had in year 3, that's a different story.
I think you're limiting your options if you keep Sam. And at this point, I was never a big proponent of I was always a big proponent of find the quarterback and problems will sort themselves out from there. Now I'm kind of like, let's get a real football coach in here and see what happens.
PJ,
I think if you're limiting your options.
Yeah, and I think that to win in the NFL, you need a good GM, which I think the Jets have. You need a good head coach and a good quarterback. I think that the Jets can kill two birds with one stone here. If they get that number 1 pick, they'll be primed to take Trevor Lawrence, which will attract a good head coach. And I think the Jets will be set up for the future. And that'll make this terrible season completely worth it. PJ, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Why don't you tell our listeners about your podcast? I mean, they got a heavy dose of draft talk on November 1st. There's plenty more months to go until this very important draft for the New York Jets. Tell listeners about your show, where they can find you on Twitter, and what you're all about.
Yeah, so my show, Boomer Bust the Draft Show, you can find us on YouTube. Twitter is at Boomer Bust Draft. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can get your podcast. Boomer Bust the Draft Show. So it's me and 3 of my buddies from Syracuse, guys that Ben knows. Every week, we break down the NFL draft. We started as kind of talking about all different sports. Now we've kind of honed it to NFL. That's what we like the most. That's what we have the most fun doing. So if you go to YouTube, we got scouting reports on pretty much the big 6 for this year. I think the top 6 of Lawrence Fields, Lance, Jamar Chase, who was at one point a potential future Jet, Penei Sewell, who is, I am not joking, the single best college football player I have ever seen, and Micah Parsons, Penn State's linebacker. We got full scouting reports complete with tape and highlights and everything, full breakdowns on all of them on YouTube. We just did our last episode. We talked about the biggest risers and fallers. I told you Kadarius Toney's my number 1 riser. Brock Purdy is a pretty big faller. If you want to get a good landscape of where college football has been in terms of the draft, who's been good, who's been bad. And we've also done a lot of cool interviews. We've interviewed a couple guys from PFF, Mike Renner, their lead draft analyst, Trevor Sikkema, the lead NFL writer for the Draft Network. We've had a lot of cool conversations with a lot of cool guys. So definitely, I recommend checking us out. Again, Boomer Bust the Draft Show. Follow us on Twitter at Boomer Bust Draft. YouTube is linked there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Appreciate the love. Appreciate you two having me. It was a pleasure. All we have to look forward to as Jet fans seemingly is the NFL draft, and I'm happy I can contribute in some way.
Yeah, and in that sense, I certainly recommend your show because this draft is so important. And the only thing that Jets fans really have to look forward to. But as I said, an absolute pleasure having you on our show. Not to stack plugs on plugs, but might as well do ours right now before we wrap it up. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. You can follow Michael at Michael_Nania, myself at Ben W. Blessington. You can find our show on iTunes and Spotify and JetsXFactor.com, the best place to go for Jets content. We are also sponsored by Manscaped. Go to manscaped.com/coolyourjets. You can find 20% off and free shipping for any product there. Make sure you check that out. And that'll do it for us. Hope everybody's having a good week. Don't let the Jets ruin your life. We have 8 more weeks of this. Actually, it's 9 weeks, including the bye. So 9 weeks of this terrible season to go. And then there is a light at the end of the tunnel, as PJ has previewed in this episode. Just have to get through these next 9 weeks, and it will be worth it. I believe in the Jets' future. It is dark right now, but get Adam Gase out of town. Get that long-haired kid from Clemson. Maybe bring in Arthur Smith.
It's always darkest before the dawn. There is a light at the end of this tunnel somewhere.
I'm all for Dark Knight quotes right there. But thanks for listening, everybody. Hope everybody's good.
Looks left under pressure. Bullets one over the middle. And he's got Crowder at the 10. Cuts it back at the 5. Goal line.
That's over the middle in the air. Picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone. Touchdown. The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
There goes Gunner to the 40, to the 30, breaks a tackle at the 20, 10, 5. Unbelievable. Touchdown.